When my daughter-in-law Vanessa laughed at me across the mahogany dining table and said, "Face it, Eleanor, you'll never afford this lifestyle," I smiled politely and cut another piece of her overpriced salmon. But 3 months later, when she saw the moving trucks pulling into the mansion next door, her laughter turned to something else entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What started as a simple family dinner at my son Marcus's new house in Belmont Heights would become the catalyst for the most liberating decision of my 72 years on this earth. I had raised Marcus as a single mother after his father abandoned us when he was barely 3 years old. I worked double shifts at the textile factory, scraped together every penny for his college tuition, and celebrated when he landed his first job at a prestigious law firm in Boston. That October evening, I arrived at their sprawling colonial home carrying a homemade apple pie and wearing my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought for special occasions 3 years ago. Vanessa greeted me at the door with her usual forced smile, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her wine glass as she air-kissed my cheek. The house was everything she'd dreamed of when she married my son 2 years prior. Marble countertops, crystal chandeliers, and Persian rugs that cost more than I earned in 6 months. She'd insisted on the most expensive neighborhood, the most exclusive decorator, the most prestigious address. Marcus worked 16-hour days to afford it all, but Vanessa had grown accustomed to luxury with frightening speed. During dinner, she regaled me with stories of their recent vacation to the French Riviera, their plans for a kitchen renovation that would cost $40,000, and their membership at the country club where she'd been taking tennis lessons. Each story felt like a deliberate reminder of the gulf between our lifestyles. I lived in the same modest 2-bedroom apartment I'd rented when Marcus was in high school. The furniture was worn but comfortable, the appliances functional but dated. I shopped at discount stores, clipped coupons religiously, and treated myself to dinner out maybe once a month. It wasn't poverty, but it was careful living, the kind of budgeting that becomes second nature when you've raised a child alone. Marcus seemed uncomfortable as Vanessa continued her monologue about their expensive tastes. He'd changed since the marriage, become quieter around me, more distant. The boy who once called me every Sunday now communicated primarily through his wife, as if she'd become the gatekeeper to our relationship. The conversation took its cruel turn when I mentioned that I was thinking about taking a small vacation, maybe a weekend trip to see the fall foliage in Vermont. Vanessa's laugh was sharp and dismissive, the sound of someone who'd never learned that wealth doesn't make you superior to others. That's when she said it, those words that would echo in my mind for weeks afterward. "Face it, Eleanor, you'll never afford this lifestyle. Some people are meant for luxury, and others are meant to admire it from a distance." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but said nothing. My son, whom I'd sacrificed everything to raise, sat silently while his wife humiliated me in their dining room. I finished my dinner with dignity, complimented their chef's cooking, and kissed them both goodbye as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. As I drove home to my apartment that night, Vanessa's words replayed in my mind like a broken record. The assumption that I was poor, that I was somehow less than her, that I existed to admire her expensive life from whatever distance she deemed appropriate. What Vanessa didn't know, what nobody knew except my lawyer and my financial advisor, was that I'd been living modestly by choice, not by necessity. When my mother passed away 5 years earlier, she'd left me an inheritance that took my breath away. My grandmother had been an astute investor, buying stock in small companies that became tech giants, purchasing real estate that multiplied in value over decades. The inheritance had sat untouched in carefully managed accounts, growing steadily while I continued my simple lifestyle. I'd planned to leave most of it to Marcus eventually, maybe help him with a down payment on a house or contribute to my future grandchildren's education. I lived on my factory pension and Social Security, banking the investment returns and dividends without touching the principal. It was old-fashioned money management, the kind my grandmother had taught me about saving for tomorrow rather than spending today. That inheritance totaled just over $2.8 million, More than enough to afford any lifestyle I chose. More than enough to make Vanessa's $40,000 kitchen renovation look like pocket change. I'd simply chosen not to flaunt wealth the way she did, preferring the security of knowing I was financially independent rather than the temporary thrill of expensive purchases. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Margaret, whom I'd been working with since receiving the inheritance. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd helped me navigate the complexities of sudden wealth while maintaining my preferred modest lifestyle. "Margaret," I said over the phone, "I need to discuss accessing some of my funds for a significant purchase." She was immediately attentive, asking about my plans and whether I needed liquidity analysis for the transaction. What I had in mind would require careful planning and impeccable timing. That afternoon, I called the most exclusive real estate agent in Belmont Heights, a woman named Patricia who specialized in luxury properties and had a reputation for discretion. I explained that I was interested in purchasing a home in the neighborhood, something substantial and impressive, preferably on Elm Street where my son lived. Patricia was professional but clearly skeptical when I mentioned my budget parameters. When I told her I was pre-approved for a cash purchase up to $1.5 million, her tone shifted immediately. Cash buyers were gold in the luxury real estate market, especially ones who could move quickly and weren't dependent on financing contingencies. Within 2 days, she'd arranged viewings for 3 properties. The first was lovely but modest by neighborhood standards. The second was impressive but lacked the impact I was looking for. The third took my breath away and made me understand exactly why Vanessa had chosen this neighborhood for its prestige. The Whitmore estate sat directly next door to Marcus and Vanessa's house, separated by a carefully managed hedge and a wrought iron fence that probably cost most people's cars. It was a Georgian mansion built in the 1920s, recently renovated with every luxury feature imaginable. 7 bedrooms, 5 baths, a gourmet kitchen that would make professional chefs weep with envy, and grounds that looked like something from a magazine spread. The asking price was $1.3 million, which Patricia assured me was reasonable for the neighborhood and the property's condition. The current owners were relocating to California for work and needed to sell quickly, making them motivated to accept a strong cash offer. Standing in the master bathroom, looking out the window directly into Marcus and Vanessa's backyard, I imagined the expression on my daughter-in-law's face when she realized who her new neighbor would be. The woman who would never afford her lifestyle had just purchased the most expensive house on the block. I made a full-price cash offer that afternoon, contingent on a quick closing within 30 days. The sellers accepted immediately, thrilled to avoid the complications of financing and inspections that typically slow luxury real estate transactions. Patricia handled the paperwork with impressive efficiency, coordinating inspections, title searches, and closing procedures with the kind of attention that justified her premium commission. The beauty of a cash purchase was its simplicity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. No mortgage applications, no credit checks, no financing contingencies that could derail the deal. My banker arranged the wire transfer of funds, my lawyer reviewed all contracts and closing documents, and within 3 weeks, I owned the house next door to my son and his wife. During those 3 weeks, I maintained my normal routine. I continued grocery shopping with coupons, driving my reliable but unremarkable sedan, wearing my practical clothes. I mentioned nothing to Marcus about the real estate purchase, allowing him and Vanessa to continue their comfortable assumption about my financial limitations. The only preparation I made was hiring an interior designer, someone Patricia recommended who specialized in luxury home staging. I explained that I wanted the house to look lived in but impressive, comfortable but clearly expensive. The designer, a sophisticated woman named Caroline, understood immediately what I was trying to achieve. We furnished the house with quality pieces that suggested good taste and substantial resources without being ostentatious. Persian rugs that complemented the hardwood floors, art that looked collected rather than purchased, furniture that invited relaxation while clearly being well-made and expensive. The kitchen was stocked with high-end appliances and copper cookware that gleamed under the recessed lighting. The closing took place on a Wednesday morning in November. I sat across from the sellers and their real estate attorney, signing document after document, while Patricia handled the logistics. When the final signature was complete and the keys were placed in my hand, I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with owning expensive real estate and everything to do with controlling my own narrative. That evening, I called the moving company I'd hired to transport my belongings from the apartment. They'd been instructed to arrive early Saturday morning, ensuring that Marcus and Vanessa would witness the spectacle from their kitchen window during their usual weekend breakfast routine. Friday night, I packed my modest possessions with care. My books, my photographs, my mother's china, the quilt my grandmother had made by hand. These items would look humble in my new mansion, but they represented continuity. The reminder that wealth doesn't change who you are fundamentally. I also packed the financial documents that proved my net worth, not because I planned to show them to anyone, but because holding them reminded me that Vanessa's assumptions about my limitations were about to become publicly incorrect. The bank statements, investment summaries, and account balances that told the real story of Eleanor Mitchell's financial situation. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear. Perfect weather for a dramatic revelation. I positioned myself on my new front porch at exactly 8 o'clock, knowing that Marcus and Vanessa would be having breakfast by their kitchen window at that time. The moving truck was scheduled to arrive at 8:15, giving me a few minutes to watch their morning routine from my new vantage point. Through their window, I could see Vanessa in her silk robe, probably discussing plans for another expensive renovation or exclusive vacation. Marcus sat across from her, scrolling through his phone while eating breakfast. They looked comfortable, settled into their assumptions about their place in the neighborhood hierarchy. The moving truck rounded the corner at exactly 8:20, its size and professional appearance commanding attention throughout the quiet residential street. The company I'd hired specialized in luxury relocations, and their equipment and uniforms reflected that specialization. This wasn't a budget move. It was the kind of relocation service that suggested significant resources. I watched Marcus look up from his phone as the truck parked in front of the Whitmore estate. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to confusion as he realized that someone was moving into the house next door. Vanessa joined him at the window, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips as she watched the movers begin unloading furniture and boxes. The confusion deepened when they saw me walk down from the front porch to greet the moving team. I was clearly supervising the move, clearly the homeowner, clearly not just visiting or helping someone else relocate. Marcus stepped outside onto his deck, probably hoping to get a better view of what was happening. Our eyes met across the yard, and I waved pleasantly, as if running into a neighbor by coincidence. He looked stunned, trying to process what he was witnessing. His mother, the woman who supposedly couldn't afford his wife's lifestyle, was directing a luxury moving service to relocate her belongings into the most expensive house on the block. Vanessa appeared beside him on the deck, still in her robe, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled from sleep. When she saw me, her expression went through several distinct phases. First confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked suspiciously like panic. I walked over to the hedge that separated our properties, carrying a small potted plant as a housewarming gift to myself. The morning sun caught the diamond earrings I'd decided to wear for the occasion, understated but unmistakably real and substantial. "Good morning, Marcus," I called cheerfully. "Beautiful day for a move, don't you think?" He was speechless, literally unable to form words as he stared at me. Vanessa had gone pale, gripping the deck railing as if she needed physical support. "Mom," Marcus finally managed, "what's going on? Are you helping someone move in?" "I'm moving in myself, dear. I bought the house, closed on Wednesday, and today I'm officially becoming your next-door neighbor." The silence that followed was profound. I could hear birds chirping, cars passing on the street, the sounds of the movers organizing my belongings, but nothing from Marcus or Vanessa. They stood frozen on their deck like mannequins in a department store window. Vanessa found her voice first, though it came out as more of a croak than her usual confident tone. "You bought this house? The Whitmore estate? With what money?" I smiled pleasantly, the same polite expression I'd worn during our dinner last month.
"I've been saving up for something special," I explained. "Sometimes it pays to live modestly for a few years so you can afford exactly what you want when the time is right." The moving process continued around us, professional and efficient. My furniture looked appropriately scaled for the mansion's proportions, thanks to Caroline's careful selection. The antique dining set I'd purchased fit perfectly in the formal dining room. The Persian rugs looked like they'd been woven specifically for the hardwood floors.
Marcus walked over to the hedge, his lawyer's mind probably trying to understand the legal and financial mechanics of what he was witnessing. "Mom," he said quietly, "how did you afford this? This house cost over $1 million." "I've been fortunate with some investments," I replied, which was technically accurate without being specific. "Your grandmother taught me the value of long-term financial planning." Vanessa had recovered enough to put on clothes and join us at the hedge. She'd replaced her robe with designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, but her composure remained shaky. Her eyes were calculating, probably trying to reassess everything she thought she knew about our family's financial dynamics. "Eleanor," she said, attempting to sound casual, "I had no idea you were interested in luxury real estate. You seemed so content with your little apartment." "I was content," I agreed, "but sometimes circumstances change, and you realize it's time to embrace new possibilities. Last month, you mentioned that some people are meant for luxury. I decided you were absolutely right." The moving team worked with impressive efficiency, transforming the empty mansion into a lived-in home within hours. Each room revealed new evidence of my financial capabilities, from the artwork to the furniture to the kitchen supplies that suggested serious culinary aspirations. By afternoon, the transformation was complete. The Whitmore estate had become Eleanor Mitchell's home, and the neighborhood's assumptions about the widow in the modest apartment had been permanently altered. I invited Marcus and Vanessa over for coffee, giving them their first tour of my new living situation. Walking through the house, Vanessa was unnaturally quiet. Each room seemed to diminish her confidence further, as if the physical evidence of my wealth was dissolving her sense of superiority. The master bedroom, with its walk-in closet larger than her guest room. The library lined with first-edition books I'd been collecting quietly for years. The wine cellar stocked with vintages that most people only read about in magazines. Marcus asked careful questions about the purchase, the financing, the renovation plans. His legal training made him naturally curious about complex transactions, but I could tell he was also trying to understand how his financial assumptions about his mother had been so completely wrong. In the kitchen, surrounded by professional-grade appliances and imported marble countertops, I served coffee in cups that had belonged to my grandmother. The contrast was intentional, expensive surroundings with personal touches that reminded everyone that wealth doesn't erase history or relationships. Vanessa stood by the window that overlooked their backyard, probably processing the fact that I would now have a clear view of their outdoor activities. The dynamic between our houses had shifted permanently. She was no longer the undisputed queen of Elm Street luxury. As they prepared to leave, Marcus hugged me with what seemed like genuine affection mixed with bewilderment. I could tell he was happy for my good fortune, but confused about why I'd never mentioned my financial situation during our previous conversations. "Mom," he said as we stood in my new foyer, "why didn't you ever tell me about your investments? I've been worried about your retirement security for years." "I preferred financial privacy," I replied. "Some things are better kept quiet until there's a reason to share them." Vanessa shook my hand rather than offering her usual air kiss, a small gesture that spoke volumes about how the day's revelations had affected her. Her grip was firm, but her eyes held something new, not quite respect, but definitely a recalibrated understanding of who she was dealing with. That evening, I sat on my new back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over my perfectly landscaped gardens. The house felt enormous after years in my apartment, but it also felt right, as if I'd been postponing this comfort for too long.
Through the windows of Marcus and Vanessa's house, I could see them moving around their kitchen, probably discussing the day's developments. Their conversations would be different now, their assumptions about family dynamics permanently altered by the reality of my financial independence. The truth was, I could have afforded this lifestyle for years. The inheritance from my mother had been substantial enough to support luxury from the moment I received it. But I'd chosen modesty, partly from habit and partly from the belief that flaunting wealth was unseemly. Vanessa's cruel comment at dinner had changed my perspective completely. If she was going to judge me based on assumed limitations, if she was going to use money as a weapon to establish hierarchy within our family, then perhaps it was time to reveal that I'd been playing by different rules entirely. I'd bought the house not just for luxury, but for proximity. Living next door to Marcus meant I could be part of his daily life again, available for spontaneous conversations and family moments that had become rare since his marriage. Vanessa could no longer control access to my son by managing social calendars and family invitations. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to diminish me with her comment about lifestyle, she'd motivated me to embrace a lifestyle that overshadowed hers entirely. My house was larger, my furnishings more expensive, my location more prestigious. I'd accidentally become everything she aspired to be. But the real satisfaction wasn't in the material competition. It was in the knowledge that respect based on assumed wealth was hollow, while respect earned through character and relationships was genuine. Marcus's love for me shouldn't depend on my bank account, and if Vanessa's respect required proof of financial status, then at least now we were operating from accurate information. As darkness fell over Belmont Heights, lights came on in houses throughout the neighborhood. Each home represented families with their own dynamics, their own assumptions, their own secrets. Mine happened to involve a modest widow who'd been wealthy all along, but preferred financial privacy to social posturing. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new dynamics, new opportunities to build genuine relationships based on truth rather than assumptions. Vanessa would have to decide whether she wanted a real relationship with her mother-in-law or preferred to maintain distance from someone whose financial resources exceeded her own. Marcus would need to process the fact that his mother had been protecting him from financial worry through her modest lifestyle, allowing him to develop independence without feeling overshadowed by inherited wealth. The lessons about hard work and self-reliance that I'd taught him remained valid regardless of my bank account. The house around me settled into comfortable evening sounds, the grandfather clock in the hallway, the ice maker in the kitchen, the central air system maintaining perfect temperature throughout 7,000 square feet of luxury. It felt like home already, as if I'd been postponing this comfort but never truly sacrificing it. I thought about calling Margaret to thank her for managing the financial aspects of the purchase so smoothly, about calling Patricia to compliment her on finding the perfect property, about calling Caroline to praise her staging work.
But mostly, I thought about calling Marcus tomorrow to invite him for breakfast, just the two of us, to begin rebuilding our relationship from this new foundation of complete honesty. The woman who supposedly would never afford Vanessa's lifestyle was now living a lifestyle that made Vanessa's look modest by comparison. But more importantly, the mother who'd been dismissed and diminished had reclaimed her rightful place in her son's life, one carefully planned real estate purchase at a time. The first month in my new home passed with surprising tranquility. I established routines that felt natural despite the grandeur of my surroundings. Morning coffee on the sunroom overlooking my gardens, afternoon reading in the library where late sunlight streamed through tall windows, evening walks through the neighborhood where other residents began acknowledging me with respectful nods. My relationship with Marcus improved dramatically once we were neighbors. He started dropping by after work, sometimes staying for dinner in my spacious kitchen where we could talk without Vanessa's constant interruptions. These conversations revealed how much distance had grown between us during his marriage, distance I hadn't fully recognized until it began disappearing. He told me about the pressure he felt to maintain their expensive lifestyle, the long hours he worked to afford Vanessa's tastes, the credit card debt they'd accumulated despite his substantial salary. His wife's spending had accelerated since their wedding, as if marriage had given her permission to embrace luxury without restraint. Marcus also confessed that he'd been embarrassed by what he perceived as my financial struggles, ashamed that he couldn't help me live better while supporting his wife's extravagant preferences. He'd avoided inviting me to their social events because he thought I'd feel uncomfortable around their wealthy friends, not realizing that I could have afforded anything they could. These revelations made me understand that Vanessa's cruel comment at dinner hadn't just been about establishing social hierarchy. She'd been deliberately maintaining separation between Marcus and me, using perceived class differences to justify limiting our contact. My financial privacy had inadvertently given her a weapon to use against our relationship. Meanwhile, Vanessa's behavior toward me underwent a fascinating transformation. Gone was the condescending tone, replaced by an awkward formality that suggested she was still processing the implications of our reversed circumstances. She began bringing me small gifts, expensive chocolates, flowers from the premium florist, bottles of wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget used to be. Her gestures felt calculated rather than genuine, as if she was trying to establish some new form of relationship now that she understood my actual financial position. The woman who had dismissed me as someone who would never afford luxury was now attempting to curry favor with someone whose wealth exceeded her own. I accepted her offerings graciously, but maintained emotional distance. Trust, once broken, required more than expensive gifts to repair. Her comment about my lifestyle limitations had revealed something fundamental about her character, something that wouldn't be erased by a few bottles of premium wine. The holidays approached with new complexity. For the first time in years, I could host Christmas dinner in a space worthy of the occasion. My formal dining room could accommodate 12 people comfortably, and my kitchen had every amenity needed for elaborate meal preparation. But the question remained whether I wanted to celebrate with people who had dismissed me so thoroughly just months before. I decided to test the waters by hosting Thanksgiving, inviting Marcus and Vanessa, along with my sister Catherine, who lived 2 hours away and had always been supportive of my modest lifestyle choices. Catherine knew about my inheritance, but had respected my preference for financial privacy, never questioning my decision to live below my means. The preparation for Thanksgiving revealed how much I'd missed entertaining. I hired a local chef to help with the more complex dishes, while I focused on family recipes that had special meaning. The house filled with wonderful aromas, and I felt genuine pleasure in creating a beautiful celebration for people I cared about. Catherine arrived early, marveling at the transformation in my living situation. She understood immediately what had motivated my decision to embrace luxury after years of careful frugality. Her support meant everything, reminding me that not everyone would judge my choices or question my right to live comfortably. Marcus and Vanessa arrived promptly at 2 o'clock, both dressed more formally than usual. Vanessa had clearly spent considerable time on her appearance, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her nervousness was palpable as she complimented every aspect of my home with almost desperate enthusiasm. The dinner itself was magnificent. The dining room, with its crystal chandelier and antique furniture, provided the perfect setting for our feast. My grandmother's china looked elegant against the mahogany table, and the flowers I'd arranged created a centerpiece worthy of a magazine photograph. During the meal, Vanessa worked overtime to be charming, asking about my decorating choices, complimenting my cooking skills, inquiring about my holiday plans. Her efforts felt forced, like someone performing a role rather than engaging in genuine conversation. She was trying too hard, overcompensating for her previous dismissive behavior. Marcus seemed more relaxed, clearly enjoying the excellent food and elegant surroundings. He helped serve dishes, refilled wine glasses, and participated in natural conversation with Catherine about family memories and shared experiences. For the first time in months, he seemed like the son I remembered from before his marriage. After dinner, as we sat in my living room with coffee and dessert, Vanessa made her first direct reference to our changed circumstances. "Eleanor," she said carefully, "I want to apologize for my comment at dinner last month. I spoke without thinking, and I realize now how hurtful that must have been." I nodded politely, acknowledging her apology without immediately accepting it. Words are powerful things, Vanessa. Sometimes they reveal more about a person's character than they intend to show.
She flushed slightly, understanding that forgiveness wouldn't be automatic or complete. "I hope we can move forward from this and build a better relationship," she continued. "I'd like to get to know you better, the real you." "The real me has been here all along," I replied gently. "I've simply been private about certain aspects of my life. Financial circumstances don't change someone's fundamental character." Catherine watched this exchange with interest, probably recognizing the careful diplomacy required to navigate such complex family dynamics. She'd seen me handle difficult people throughout our lives, but this situation required particular delicacy because of Marcus's position between his wife and his mother. As the evening wound down, Marcus lingered after Catherine and Vanessa had left. We cleaned dishes together in my professional kitchen, working in comfortable silence, broken by occasional observations about the dinner's success. "Mom," he said as we finished loading the dishwasher, "I need to ask you something directly. How long have you had this kind of money? How long have you been able to afford this lifestyle?"
5 years, I answered honestly, since your grandmother's estate was settled. But I chose to continue living modestly because it felt right for me then. He leaned against the marble counter, processing this information. "So when I worried about your retirement security, when I felt guilty about not being able to help you financially, you were actually wealthier than Vanessa and I combined?" "Considerably wealthier," I confirmed. "But I didn't want you to know, because I wanted you to develop independence and work ethic without feeling overshadowed by inherited money." His expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something that looked like relief mixed with frustration. "I wish you'd told me sooner," he said. "I've been carrying guilt about not doing enough for you." The guilt was unnecessary, but the concern was appreciated. You became a successful, responsible adult partly because you learned to work for what you wanted rather than expecting things to be provided for you. We talked until nearly midnight, the longest conversation we'd had in years. Marcus shared details about his marriage that he'd kept private, his concerns about Vanessa's spending habits, her expectations about lifestyle maintenance, her tendency to judge people based on material possessions rather than character. He also admitted that her comment about my financial limitations had bothered him deeply, but he'd been caught off guard and hadn't known how to respond appropriately. His silence during that dinner still embarrassed him, and he was grateful I'd found a way to address the situation so definitively. The weeks following Thanksgiving brought interesting developments throughout the neighborhood. Word of my purchase had spread along the other residents, and suddenly I was receiving invitations to social events I'd never been considered for when I lived in my modest apartment. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same people who had ignored Eleanor the factory retiree were now eager to befriend Eleanor the mansion owner. I accepted some invitations selectively, curious about the social dynamics of luxury neighborhood living. The holiday parties revealed a community obsessed with status symbols, renovation projects, and expensive travel destinations. Conversations rarely moved beyond surface topics, and genuine connections seemed rare among people who related primarily through material comparisons. Vanessa attended many of these same events, and I observed her behavior with fascination. She seemed to have positioned herself as an expert on my situation, sharing what she claimed to know about my background and financial circumstances with anyone who would listen. Her version of events painted her as someone who had always recognized my potential for wealth, conveniently omitting her cruel comment about lifestyle limitations. At one particularly elegant party hosted by the neighborhood's unofficial social leader, I overheard Vanessa telling a group of women that she'd always known I was more sophisticated than I appeared. She described our family dinners as if they'd been warm, intimate gatherings where she'd provided emotional support during my transition to luxury living. Her revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. The woman who had dismissed me so cruelly was now claiming credit for recognizing my worth all along. I didn't correct her narrative publicly, but I made mental notes about her willingness to rewrite reality when it served her purposes. December brought the first real test of our new family dynamics. Marcus and Vanessa's wedding anniversary approached, and they planned an elaborate party to celebrate 2 years of marriage. The guest list included colleagues from Marcus's law firm, Vanessa's social circle, and various neighborhood couples they'd befriended. Vanessa extended an invitation with obvious nervousness, clearly unsure how I might behave at their celebration. She probably worried that I'd share details about her previous treatment of me or somehow embarrass her in front of their friends. Her anxiety was palpable as she described the party plans and emphasized how much my attendance would mean to them. I accepted graciously, curious to see how she would present our relationship to people who knew nothing about our recent history. The party would be held at the country club where she'd been taking tennis lessons, the same exclusive venue she'd mentioned during that fateful dinner to emphasize the lifestyle differences between us. I hired a personal shopper to help select an appropriate dress for the occasion, something elegant but not ostentatious, expensive but not obviously so. The goal was to look naturally sophisticated rather than newly wealthy. My appearance should suggest someone comfortable with luxury rather than someone trying to prove her financial status. The night of the anniversary party, I arrived fashionably late and immediately noticed how the dynamics in the room shifted when people realized who I was. Word of my real estate purchase had clearly spread through their social circle, and I was greeted with the kind of attention usually reserved for celebrities or major donors. Vanessa appeared at my side within minutes, linking her arm through mine as if we were close confidants. She introduced me to various guests with glowing descriptions of my wisdom, my sophistication, my wonderful influence on Marcus's life. Her performance was masterful, creating an illusion of warm family relationships that bore no resemblance to our actual history. Marcus seemed uncomfortable with his wife's theatrical display of affection toward me, but he played along for the sake of social harmony. His colleagues from the law firm were polite and professional, asking appropriate questions about my background and expressing interest in my recent relocation to the neighborhood. The evening's most revealing moment came when I was introduced to Vanessa's mother, Patricia, who was visiting from Florida for the anniversary celebration. Patricia was an elegant woman in her 70s who clearly understood social dynamics and had raised her daughter to navigate wealthy circles with skill. During our conversation, Patricia made several comments that suggested Vanessa had been complaining about me for months, describing me as difficult, antisocial, and resistant to accepting her place within their family structure. She seemed surprised to discover that I was articulate, well-dressed, and obviously comfortable in upscale social settings. "Eleanor," Patricia said at one point, "Vanessa told me you'd had some adjustments to make when Marcus married into a higher social class. I'm so pleased to see how well you've adapted to their lifestyle." I smiled politely, while internally marveling at how thoroughly Vanessa had distorted our family dynamics. According to her version of events, she had been helping me adapt to luxury rather than dismissing my financial limitations and social background. "Actually," I replied carefully, "I think we've all been learning about each other. Sometimes assumptions prove to be inaccurate, and it's wonderful when families can move beyond initial misunderstandings." Patricia nodded approvingly, probably thinking I was graciously acknowledging Vanessa's generous assistance in my social education. She had no way of knowing that her daughter had been the one making assumptions, or that those assumptions had been spectacularly wrong. The party continued with speeches, toasts, and dancing. Marcus gave a heartfelt tribute to his wife, thanking her for bringing elegance and beauty into his life. Vanessa responded with her own speech, praising Marcus's dedication and work ethic while mentioning how grateful she was for the loving family support that surrounded their marriage. Her reference to loving family support was delivered while looking directly at me, as if I had been instrumental in creating the stable foundation for their relationship. The audience applauded warmly, completely unaware that the loving support she described had been largely absent until very recently. As the evening wound down, I found myself reflecting on the strange theater of social relationships in wealthy circles. Truth seemed less important than appearance, and history could be rewritten as easily as changing a dress for different occasions.
5 years, I answered honestly, since your grandmother's estate was settled. But I chose to continue living modestly because it felt right for me then. He leaned against the marble counter, processing this information. So when I worried about your retirement security, when I felt guilty about not being able to help you financially, you were actually wealthier than Vanessa and I combined? Considerably wealthier, I confirmed. But I didn't want you to know, because I wanted you to develop independence and work ethic without feeling overshadowed by inherited money. His expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something that looked like relief mixed with frustration. "I wish you'd told me sooner," he said. I've been carrying guilt about not doing enough for you." The guilt was unnecessary, but the concern was appreciated. You became a successful, responsible adult partly because you learned to work for what you wanted rather than expecting things to be provided for you. We talked until nearly midnight, the longest conversation we'd had in years. Marcus shared details about his marriage that he'd kept private, his concerns about Vanessa's spending habits, her expectations about lifestyle maintenance, her tendency to judge people based on material possessions rather than character. He also admitted that her comment about my financial limitations had bothered him deeply, but he'd been caught off guard and hadn't known how to respond appropriately. His silence during that dinner still embarrassed him, and he was grateful I'd found a way to address the situation so definitively. The weeks following Thanksgiving brought interesting developments throughout the neighborhood. Word of my purchase had spread along the other residents, and suddenly I was receiving invitations to social events I'd never been considered for when I lived in my modest apartment. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same people who had ignored Eleanor the factory retiree were now eager to befriend Eleanor the mansion owner. I accepted some invitations selectively, curious about the social dynamics of luxury neighborhood living. The holiday parties revealed a community obsessed with status symbols, renovation projects, and expensive travel destinations. Conversations rarely moved beyond surface topics, and genuine connections seemed rare among people who related primarily through material comparisons. Vanessa attended many of these same events, and I observed her behavior with fascination. She seemed to have positioned herself as an expert on my situation, sharing what she claimed to know about my background and financial circumstances with anyone who would listen. Her version of events painted her as someone who had always recognized my potential for wealth, conveniently omitting her cruel comment about lifestyle limitations. At one particularly elegant party hosted by the neighborhood's unofficial social leader, I overheard Vanessa telling a group of women that she'd always known I was more sophisticated than I appeared. She described our family dinners as if they'd been warm, intimate gatherings where she'd provided emotional support during my transition to luxury living. Her revisionist history was breathtaking in its audacity. The woman who had dismissed me so cruelly was now claiming credit for recognizing my worth all along. I didn't correct her narrative publicly, but I made mental notes about her willingness to rewrite reality when it served her purposes. December brought the first real test of our new family dynamics. Marcus and Vanessa's wedding anniversary approached, and they planned an elaborate party to celebrate 2 years of marriage. The guest list included colleagues from Marcus's law firm, Vanessa's social circle, and various neighborhood couples they'd befriended. Vanessa extended an invitation with obvious nervousness, clearly unsure how I might behave at their celebration. She probably worried that I'd share details about her previous treatment of me or somehow embarrass her in front of their friends. Her anxiety was palpable as she described the party plans and emphasized how much my attendance would mean to them. I accepted graciously, curious to see how she would present our relationship to people who knew nothing about our recent history. The party would be held at the country club where she'd been taking tennis lessons, the same exclusive venue she'd mentioned during that fateful dinner to emphasize the lifestyle differences between us. I hired a personal shopper to help select an appropriate dress for the occasion, something elegant but not ostentatious, expensive but not obviously so. The goal was to look naturally sophisticated rather than newly wealthy. My appearance should suggest someone comfortable with luxury rather than someone trying to prove her financial status. The night of the anniversary party, I arrived fashionably late and immediately noticed how the dynamics in the room shifted when people realized who I was. Word of my real estate purchase had clearly spread through their social circle, and I was greeted with the kind of attention usually reserved for celebrities or major donors. Vanessa appeared at my side within minutes, linking her arm through mine as if we were close confidants. She introduced me to various guests with glowing descriptions of my wisdom, my sophistication, my wonderful influence on Marcus's life. Her performance was masterful, creating an illusion of warm family relationships that bore no resemblance to our actual history. Marcus seemed uncomfortable with his wife's theatrical display of affection toward me, but he played along for the sake of social harmony. His colleagues from the law firm were polite and professional, asking appropriate questions about my background and expressing interest in my recent relocation to the neighborhood. The evening's most revealing moment came when I was introduced to Vanessa's mother, Patricia, who was visiting from Florida for the anniversary celebration. Patricia was an elegant woman in her 70s who clearly understood social dynamics and had raised her daughter to navigate wealthy circles with skill. During our conversation, Patricia made several comments that suggested Vanessa had been complaining about me for months, describing me as difficult, antisocial, and resistant to accepting her place within their family structure. She seemed surprised to discover that I was articulate, well-dressed, and obviously comfortable in upscale social settings. "Eleanor," Patricia said at one point, "Vanessa told me you'd had some adjustments to make when Marcus married into a higher social class. I'm so pleased to see how well you've adapted to their lifestyle." I smiled politely, while internally marveling at how thoroughly Vanessa had distorted our family dynamics. According to her version of events, she had been helping me adapt to luxury rather than dismissing my financial limitations and social background. "Actually," I replied carefully, "I think we've all been learning about each other. Sometimes assumptions prove to be inaccurate, and it's wonderful when families can move beyond initial misunderstandings." Patricia nodded approvingly, probably thinking I was graciously acknowledging Vanessa's generous assistance in my social education. She had no way of knowing that her daughter had been the one making assumptions, or that those assumptions had been spectacularly wrong. The party continued with speeches, toasts, and dancing. Marcus gave a heartfelt tribute to his wife, thanking her for bringing elegance and beauty into his life. Vanessa responded with her own speech, praising Marcus's dedication and work ethic while mentioning how grateful she was for the loving family support that surrounded their marriage. Her reference to loving family support was delivered while looking directly at me, as if I had been instrumental in creating the stable foundation for their relationship. The audience applauded warmly, completely unaware that the loving support she described had been largely absent until very recently. As the evening wound down, I found myself reflecting on the strange theater of social relationships in wealthy circles. Truth seemed less important than appearance, and history could be rewritten as easily as changing a dress for different occasions. Vanessa had transformed herself from someone who dismissed me into someone who cherished my presence, and most people accepted this transformation without question. The drive home took me through familiar streets lined with expensive houses, each one representing families with their own complicated dynamics and carefully maintained facades. My own house stood illuminated by landscape lighting, looking elegant and welcoming in the winter darkness. Inside, I changed out of my party dress and into comfortable clothes, then sat in my library with a cup of tea to process the evening's experiences. The books surrounding me represented decades of quiet learning and personal growth, achievements that had nothing to do with bank accounts or real estate purchases. Vanessa's performance at the party had been impressive in its completeness. She'd managed to rewrite our entire relationship history in front of dozens of witnesses, transforming herself from antagonist to supportive daughter-in-law through sheer force of confident presentation. Her ability to adapt her narrative to changing circumstances was both disturbing and admirable. But beneath her social theater, I sensed genuine anxiety about our future relationship. She understood that her previous behavior had damaged something that might be difficult to repair, and she was working overtime to establish a new foundation for our interactions. Her efforts were self-serving, but they also suggested recognition that treating me with respect was now necessary for her own comfort. Marcus appeared at my door the next morning with coffee and pastries from an expensive bakery downtown. He wanted to discuss the party and checked whether I'd enjoyed the celebration or felt uncomfortable with Vanessa's enthusiastic displays of affection. I told him about my conversation with his mother-in-law, sharing Patricia's comments about my supposed social adjustments and need for guidance. His expression darkened as he realized how thoroughly Vanessa had misrepresented our family dynamics to her own mother. "She's been telling people that you were the problem," he said quietly, "that you were difficult and resistant to accepting her help with social situations." I nodded, having suspected as much from various interactions throughout the evening. People judge situations based on the information they receive. If someone consistently presents themselves as helpful while describing others as difficult, most people will accept that narrative without investigation.
Marcus apologized for his wife's behavior, but I reminded him that apologies from third parties weren't meaningful. If Vanessa wanted to repair our relationship, she would need to acknowledge her actual behavior rather than continuing to revise history for social convenience. The conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with my son. He finally understood that his wife had been actively undermining our connection for months, using financial assumptions and social prejudices to justify her dismissive treatment of me. His loyalty began shifting back toward honesty rather than marital harmony. Christmas Eve brought the ultimate test of our family dynamics. Vanessa suggested hosting dinner at their house, but I offered to host at my home instead, pointing out that my dining room could accommodate more guests if other family members wanted to join us. The real reason was that I wanted control over the environment and the evening's tone. I invited Catherine and her husband, creating a buffer of supportive family members who knew our actual history. Vanessa couldn't perform her loving daughter-in-law routine as effectively with witnesses who understood the truth about our relationship evolution. The Christmas dinner was elegant but comfortable, with decorations that balanced luxury with warmth. My house looked magnificent in the holiday lighting, and I felt genuine pride in creating a beautiful celebration for people I loved, regardless of our complicated history. Vanessa behaved perfectly throughout the evening, contributing to conversation without dominating it, complimenting the meal and decorations sincerely, and treating me with consistent respect. Whether this represented genuine change or skilled performance remained to be seen, but at least she learned appropriate behavior. As the evening ended and guests prepared to leave, Vanessa asked to speak with me privately. We stepped into my study, where she sat across from my desk with an expression that suggested she'd been planning this conversation carefully. "Eleanor," she began, "I know I hurt you badly with my comment about lifestyle, and I know my apology at Thanksgiving wasn't sufficient. I've spent months thinking about why I said something so cruel, and I've realized it came from my own insecurities about fitting into this social class." I listened without interrupting, curious to see whether she would acknowledge the full scope of her behavior or continue offering partial apologies for isolated incidents. "When I married Marcus," she continued, "I felt like an imposter in his world. My family had money, but not old money, not the kind of established wealth that commands automatic respect. I was trying so hard to prove I belonged that I pushed away anyone who might threaten my position." This was more honest than anything she'd shared previously, suggesting that her cruel comment hadn't been casual cruelty, but rather strategic social positioning. She'd been trying to establish herself as the family's financial authority by diminishing my status. "I saw you as competition for Marcus's attention," she admitted. "I thought if I could make you seem needy or dependent, he would focus more energy on our marriage and less on his relationship with you." Her analysis was perceptive and probably accurate. She'd been threatened by my close relationship with Marcus and had used perceived financial differences to create distance between us. My financial privacy had inadvertently given her a weapon to use against our bond. "But now I realize I was wrong about everything," she continued. "Wrong about your financial situation, wrong about your character, wrong about your place in this family. I hope we can start over and build something genuine instead of something based on my fears and assumptions." I appreciated her honesty and her acknowledgement of the calculation behind her previous behavior. Starting over required a foundation of truth rather than convenience, and this conversation felt like the first genuinely honest exchange we'd ever had. "Vanessa," I said finally, "I accept your apology and your explanation. Building a better relationship will take time and consistent behavior, but I'm willing to try if you are." She nodded gratefully, probably relieved that I hadn't dismissed her entirely or demanded more dramatic gestures of repentance. We shook hands formally, like business partners agreeing to new terms rather than family members reconciling emotionally. The conversation marked the end of one phase of our relationship and the beginning of something else entirely. Whether that something would prove genuine or merely more sophisticated performance remained to be seen, but at least we were operating from a foundation of acknowledged truth rather than comfortable assumptions. As I prepared for bed that Christmas Eve, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. A single cruel comment about lifestyle limitations had motivated me to embrace a lifestyle that exceeded anything my daughter-in-law had imagined possible. But more importantly, it had forced our family to confront truths about money, respect, and relationship dynamics that had been festering beneath the surface for years. The woman who would never afford luxury was now living more luxuriously than the person who had dismissed her limitations. But the real victory wasn't in material competition or social status. It was in reclaiming my rightful place in my son's life and demanding the respect that every person deserves regardless of their financial circumstances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to build genuine relationships based on truth rather than assumptions.
The mansion next door had become more than just real estate. It had become a symbol of self-respect and a foundation for family dynamics based on honesty rather than financial prejudice. The new year arrived with unexpected developments that would reshape our family dynamics permanently. January brought a bitter cold snap that kept most people indoors, but it also brought clarity about relationships that had been obscured by holiday politeness and social obligations. Marcus stopped by on New Year's Day morning, looking troubled in a way that immediately caught my attention. We sat in my sunroom drinking coffee while ice crystals formed patterns on the windows, creating a private sanctuary from the frozen world outside. "Mom," he said without preamble, "Vanessa and I have been having serious problems. Her spending has gotten completely out of control since your party, and she's been making financial decisions without consulting me." I listened carefully as he explained that Vanessa had interpreted the revelation of my wealth as permission to escalate her own lifestyle expectations. She'd hired an interior designer to renovate their kitchen without discussing the cost, purchased a luxury car that required payments they could barely afford, and booked a vacation to Europe that would drain their savings account. When he confronted her about these expenditures, she'd argued that his mother's obvious wealth proved their family had money to spend, and that he was being unreasonably stingy about maintaining appropriate social status. She seemed to believe that my financial resources were somehow available to support their lifestyle choices. More disturbing was her behavior toward other neighborhood wives, who had begun treating her with new deference after witnessing my obvious wealth at various social events. Vanessa was leveraging her connection to me to establish social credibility, claiming insider knowledge about my background and suggesting that our families shared financial resources. Marcus felt trapped between his wife's escalating commands and his own ethical boundaries. He'd worked hard to build his legal career based on merit rather than family connections, but Vanessa was undermining that independence by implying that his success was supported by inherited wealth. I asked him what he wanted from our conversation, whether he was seeking advice or simply needed someone to listen to his concerns. His answer revealed the depth of his disillusionment with his marriage and his growing understanding of his wife's character. "I think I made a terrible mistake," he admitted quietly. "I fell in love with someone who doesn't exist, someone I imagined Vanessa could become rather than accepting who she actually is. She's beautiful and socially skilled, but her values are completely different from everything you taught me." His words carried profound sadness, the kind that comes from recognizing that fundamental incompatibility can't be resolved through compromise or patience. He was facing the possibility that his marriage had been built on false assumptions about shared values and life goals. I reminded him that marriage counseling might help them address these issues, but he shook his head wearily. They'd already tried couples therapy, but Vanessa had treated the sessions as opportunities to justify her behavior rather than genuinely examining the problems between them. The conversation continued for hours as Marcus shared details about their relationship that painted a picture of escalating dysfunction. Vanessa's treatment of me had been symptomatic of deeper character issues that affected every aspect of their marriage. Her need to establish social superiority, her willingness to manipulate situations for personal advantage, her inability to accept responsibility for hurtful behavior. By afternoon, when he finally left to return home, we'd reached an understanding about his situation that would influence everything that followed. I would support whatever decision he made about his marriage, but I wouldn't enable Vanessa's manipulation or pretend that her behavior toward me had been acceptable. February brought the inevitable confrontation that had been building since Christmas.
Vanessa appeared at my door on a Thursday evening, clearly agitated and prepared for battle. She'd discovered that Marcus had been discussing their marital problems with me, and she was furious about what she perceived as interference in their relationship. "Eleanor," she said as soon as I opened the door, "we need to talk about your influence on my husband. You're undermining our marriage with your disapproval and your obvious prejudice against me." I invited her into my living room, curious to see how she would frame the situation now that her careful social performance had finally slipped. Her mask of respectful daughter-in-law had finally slipped, revealing the calculating person underneath. She accused me of using my wealth to manipulate Marcus, of encouraging him to judge her spending habits, of deliberately sabotaging their relationship because I'd never accepted her as part of the family. Her version of events portrayed me as a manipulative matriarch who couldn't tolerate sharing her son's affection. I let her finish her accusations before responding calmly. "Vanessa, I've never interfered in your marriage beyond defending myself when you attacked my character. If Marcus is questioning your relationship, perhaps you should examine your own behavior rather than blaming external influences." Her response revealed the depth of her entitlement and her fundamental misunderstanding of family relationships. She seemed to believe that marrying Marcus had given her the right to reshape family dynamics according to her preferences, including diminishing my role in his life. "You've always resented me," she continued, "because I represent everything you could never afford before your mysterious inheritance. You've been waiting for a chance to prove your superiority and make me look foolish." Her accusation was so far from truth that I almost laughed. The idea that I would purchase an expensive house simply to spite my daughter-in-law gave me far too much credit for petty motivations and far too little credit for personal dignity. "I bought this house because I wanted to live comfortably and be closer to my son," I explained patiently. "Your comment about lifestyle limitations was insulting, but it wasn't the primary motivation for my decision. I'd been considering a change in living situation for months before that dinner." She didn't believe me, couldn't accept that her significance in my decision-making process was minimal rather than central. Her narcissism required that every action be either supporting or threatening her position, making it impossible for her to understand behavior that wasn't focused on her at all. The conversation deteriorated from there, with Vanessa making increasingly wild accusations about my motives and methods. She suggested I'd been secretly wealthy all along just to make her look bad, that I'd deliberately deceived the family about my financial situation, that I was now using money as a weapon to destroy her marriage. By the time she left, storming out without resolution or acknowledgement of her own role in our family problems, I understood that reconciliation had been impossible from the beginning. Her worldview required victims and victors, and she couldn't conceive of relationships based on mutual respect rather than power dynamics. March brought news that surprised no one who had been paying attention to the deteriorating situation. Marcus filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and incompatible values. He moved into a temporary apartment while the legal proceedings began, visiting me regularly for emotional support during the difficult process. Vanessa's response to the divorce was predictably dramatic. She hired an expensive attorney and began spreading stories throughout their social circle about Marcus's cruel abandonment and my malicious interference. According to her narrative, she was the victim of a conspiracy between mother and son to exclude her from wealth she'd helped them accumulate. The divorce proceedings revealed the full extent of the financial damage Vanessa had caused during their marriage. Credit card debt, personal loans, mortgage refinancing to fund her spending sprees all accumulated during their brief marriage while Marcus worked increasingly long hours to keep up with her demands. Her attorney attempted to claim that she deserved significant alimony and property settlement based on her contributions to Marcus's career and her reasonable lifestyle expectations. The argument might have been compelling, if not for the documented evidence of her excessive spending and manipulation of family relationships. I provided a deposition about Vanessa's treatment of me and her deliberate misrepresentation of family financial resources.
The legal record would show exactly how she'd attempted to leverage my wealth for social status while simultaneously dismissing my worth as a person. The proceedings took 6 months to complete, during which time Vanessa continued her campaign to portray herself as the wronged party. She organized supporters among the neighborhood wives, sharing carefully edited versions of events that painted her as a devoted wife betrayed by her husband's controlling mother. But the truth has a way of emerging despite careful spin campaigns. Other couples began sharing their own observations about Vanessa's behavior, her tendency to manipulate social situations for personal advantage, her pattern of using people's perceived weaknesses against them in conversation. By autumn, when the divorce was finalized, Vanessa had become something of a cautionary tale among the neighborhood social circles. Her beauty and charm couldn't compensate for behavior that made genuine friendship impossible, and she found herself increasingly isolated from the community she'd worked so hard to impress. The settlement was modest but fair, giving her enough resources to start over while protecting Marcus from ongoing financial manipulation. She moved back to Florida to live with her mother, probably spinning new stories about her victimization by wealthy in-laws who couldn't appreciate her sophistication. Marcus emerged from the experience emotionally battered, but wiser about character assessment and relationship dynamics. He'd learned expensive lessons about the difference between love and infatuation, between partnership and performance, between genuine compatibility and shared social climbing. Our own relationship underwent a renaissance during his recovery period. We talked regularly about everything from career decisions to personal values, rebuilding the closeness that had been damaged by years of Vanessa's interference. He understood now how much distance she'd created between us and how deliberately she'd worked to undermine our bond. Christmas that year was peaceful and genuine, celebrated in my dining room with Catherine and her family, Marcus, and a few close friends who appreciated authenticity over social theater. The absence of drama and manipulation allowed us to focus on gratitude and connection rather than maintaining careful facades. As the new year approached, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. Vanessa's cruel comment about lifestyle limitations had indeed changed everything, but not in ways she could have anticipated. Instead of diminishing me, her words had motivated me to embrace the financial security I'd been avoiding and to demand the respect I deserved. The house next door had become more than real estate. It had become a symbol of self-worth and a foundation for honest relationships. Living in luxury wasn't about competing with my former daughter-in-law or proving my social status. It was about finally allowing myself to enjoy the security my grandmother's careful investments had provided. Marcus began dating again eventually, this time with better understanding of the qualities that mattered in a life partner. He'd learned to value kindness over beauty, authenticity over social skills, character over charisma. The lessons from his failed marriage would serve him well in future relationships. My own social life expanded beyond neighborhood events to include volunteer work with local charities, book clubs with people who shared intellectual interests, and travel groups that explored destinations I'd always wanted to visit. Wealth had given me options, but character determined how I used those options. The foundation work I'd begun during my modest years continued to grow, now supported by more substantial donations that could fund programs for families facing financial hardship. The irony wasn't lost on me that Vanessa's comment about affording luxury had ultimately benefited families who genuinely couldn't afford basic necessities. Spring brought news that Vanessa had remarried, choosing a wealthy older man in Florida who could provide the lifestyle she'd always demanded. According to mutual acquaintances, she was happy with her new social status and had successfully rewritten her history to present herself as a woman who'd escaped an unhappy first marriage to find true love. I felt no animosity toward her choice or her revisionist storytelling. Everyone deserves happiness, and if she'd found someone whose values aligned with her priorities, that was genuinely positive news. Her exit from our family had allowed healing to begin and authentic relationships to flourish. Marcus met Sarah the following summer, a fellow attorney who shared his work ethic and his values. She was intelligent without being pretentious, successful without being materialistic, beautiful without being vain. Most importantly, she treated me with natural respect from their first meeting, requiring no adjustment period or careful social navigation. Their relationship developed slowly and genuinely, based on shared interests and compatible life goals rather than physical attraction or social climbing. Sarah's family welcomed Marcus warmly, and our combined families created the kind of extended network that makes holidays and celebrations truly meaningful. When Marcus and Sarah announced their engagement 2 years later, I hosted their party in my garden on a perfect June evening. The celebration was elegant but comfortable, expensive but not ostentatious, sophisticated but genuine. Everything Vanessa's parties had tried to be but never achieved because performance can't substitute for authenticity. The wedding took place the following spring in Sarah's family church, followed by a reception that balanced luxury with warmth. I wore my grandmother's pearls and felt her presence in the happiness that surrounded us. The contrast with Marcus's first wedding was profound. This celebration was about love and family rather than social display and material competition. As I watched my son dance with his new wife, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about their happiness, I understood that Vanessa's cruel comment had ultimately been a gift. Her words had forced me to examine my own choices about how to live, spend, and relate to others. The house next door had been just the beginning of a larger transformation. The woman who supposedly would never afford luxury was now living more comfortably than she'd ever imagined possible. But the real luxury wasn't in marble countertops or crystal chandeliers. It was in honest relationships, genuine respect, and the peace that comes from knowing you're valued for who you are rather than what you can provide. 5 years after that fateful dinner comment, I was hosting Sunday brunch for Marcus and Sarah when their news arrived. Sarah was pregnant with their first child, my first grandchild, a new generation that would grow up understanding that character mattered more than bank accounts and that family bonds are strengthened by honesty rather than material competition. Looking around my dining room that morning, filled with people who chose to be there rather than people who felt obligated to attend, I realized that revenge had never been the goal. Justice had been the motivation, the simple demand for respect that every person deserves regardless of their perceived social status or financial limitations. The house next door had become home, the foundation for family relationships based on truth rather than assumptions. Vanessa's laughter at my supposed limitations had indeed changed everything, transforming a modest widow into a woman who finally embraced the security and comfort she'd earned through decades of careful living and wise choices. Sometimes the cruelest comments reveal the most about the speaker's character, and sometimes they motivate the listener to discover strength they didn't know they possessed. The woman who would never afford this lifestyle had not only afforded it, but had used it to create something far more valuable than luxury, a family built on genuine love and mutual respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.